Welcome to the Big Fat Gay Podcast, where we talk about things that are weighing on our minds. My name is Michael. I am a chaser, and today I am sitting here with Dan. We're going to do our little mini-sode. Welcome.
Hey there. Dan Oliverio, author, public speaker, and chubby chaser. So yes, it's the Chasers.
It's the Chaser Hour. Well, not quite, but...
Chaser half hour.
Chaser
maybe.
half hour. We can make it an hour.
Oh, God.
We can make it 4. The classic joke about me and Dan is that when Trevor and I go to hang out at their place, it always turns into some 5-hour discussion between me and Dan, and Trevor's there.
Which is why I have to leave the room to let Michael and Trevor have their friendship.
Because we'll take over the space, damn it.
I will just, I'll do that.
Don't put 2 chasers in a room together. Bad things happen. So today we wanted to talk about, we were going over like, what are the things that we can talk about? And there's 1,000 different things.
Oh, gosh.
But given that, and we haven't totally heard what they talked about, but Trevor and Don, from what it seems, were talking about like some communication issues with chasers, and we thought it might be good to do sort of our version of that.
I think so too. Yeah, we don't know because we haven't heard what they laid down. So communication, because it's the cliche is it's a two-way street. I would submit that you can't control the communication of the other person,
right?
So a better model, I think, sometimes is to think of it as 100% nothing, meaning that you could actually take responsibility for the other person. Like if you don't know what's going on over there, you're not stuck.
Okay.
You're not in a position of like, well, I don't know what's going on, so I'll just stop.
Yeah.
And then you just have 2 parked cars.
Right.
that aren't going anywhere.
Right. So does it end up feeling, so it's like one of the things we've talked about that you've mentioned is the idea of like having to always set stuff up yourself and sort of always be the engine driving things. And is that kind of what you're talking about, where like somebody has to make this move forward? And if it's always going to be you, at what point does that start to become a frustration?
Well, and what I was talking about is just the very fact of, let's say you connect with a guy online and you both have decided that you want to take this into the real world and you want to actually have a date. And that's a whole other exactly. And that's a whole other question. Like, what do you mean a date? Are we going to go to dinner? Are we going to go to lunch? Are we just is this an appointment to fuck?
Right.
Like, what is
there's so many different,
and people don't communicate that. And what I also find is that people are afraid to talk about it because they're afraid of like either overstepping or understepping.
Oh yeah. Because you don't, and also there's sort of that whole thing of like tipping your hand of like, if what I really do want is to hook up at the end of this, if I just come out and say that, does it ruin some of that like chase me romance flirting thing of like, I feel like some people hold that romantic vision of like, yes, like let's go out and like, let's flirt and like, let's have the build up and like, maybe there's a question at the end of the night and it's more exciting if it feels organic, but then it also leads to a lot of like, okay, we're both sitting in the car and we both want to make out, but nobody's said that we want to make out.
Anything. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think people know I'm kind of bold. So, but I've never had a bad reaction to just asking. And I realize that some people, they don't naturally communicate and they feel like asking is like the last resort. Like they're somehow failed or it's gotten to the point where I had to ask. And that's not it at all. I mean, I can't tell you the number of times where I say with a big smile on my face, may I kiss you?
Yeah. And that's great, I think.
And and there's nothing that it does not blow the moment. If anything, it enhances the moment.
I think so, because it shows, it feels incredibly intimate to ask that in a way that, like, I think there's a way to screw it up where like, if you're so shy about asking that question, like not you, but if the person is so shy about asking it that you're not looking them in the eyes and you don't seem excited about it, it might feel like you're coming at it out of obligation, and that's not great.
Well, and what's usually happening in that moment is the person is so terrified and awestruck by the guy they're trying to kiss that's why they can't make eye contact.
Right.
But yeah, the chub can sometimes take it as like, oh, you're just doing this because you're going through the motions. That's why you're not looking at me. Like, no, it's the opposite.
No, it's just... You're too pretty.
You're blinding.
Stop making this so hard for me.
But yeah, may I kiss you? Or you're really attractive. Would you like to make out? A line I use because I don't want to. I find that if you use the word sex, it can lead people astray because everybody. There's this. Unfortunately, the standard meaning of sex is I want to put my dick in your ass.
Right.
Which that's not sex. That is a particular
It's a
sexual
specific
act.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I will say to keep it loose and to keep it more fun is like if I'm at an event and I want to move it to the bedroom, I'll say something like, I'd really like to play with you. What do you think about that?
I like that because it sounds like what it is, which is just playful, fun. But at the same time, it leaves room. Like, I feel like if you ask somebody like, hey, like, do you want to go hook up?
Yeah.
A rejection of that feel like it's a really harsh rejection where it's like, oh, do you want to go play? It's like, I'm not feeling right now. Like, and I feel like there's room to sort of it's a little easier to say, or like to have that leeway or like the in between of like, okay, well, yes, eventually, but not right now. Like rejecting a hookup is so concrete.
Well, and people don't know what they're rejecting because nobody's really sure what hookup means.
Right. Right. And play could be so many things. It could just, it identifies what is supposed to be, which is just fun.
Yeah. And what I also like about play in asking that question is it then elicits the follow-up question, which is like, what do you mean play? Like, how would that go?
Sure. Yeah.
What does that look like?
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they're asking that is sort of the yes, or the yes, maybe, or the yes, it depends.
At least I'm interested enough.
I'm interested enough to follow up.
Right.
As opposed to, oh, I don't think so. No. Or I have a boyfriend or whatever the response is.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I like that. I haven't found myself in that position that often in person, but there was one particular time. I think this might be the one time in my life where I met a chubby gay guy in the wild, as it were. Like you've talked about, like
I love in the wild, yeah,
in the wild, like out in the wild,
not online, yeah.
Not online.
And not in an event where you know that what you're into, they know what you're into, and you know what they're into. And
exactly, like nothing's been talked about. This was just at a social gathering that we were both going to it was like once a week or so, and then eventually it was like, oh, like like there's this sort of the eyes of like, oh, clearly we're kind of flirting, and
you knew each other before this moment.
Yes.
And you didn't meet them at the event.
Yeah, exactly. And so eventually, and this was like back when I was single, and eventually it was like, hey, like, do you want to go on a date? And at the time I was not looking to date a person to become a boyfriend. So I was like, hey, just, like, yes, I'm actually interested in you, just so you know, I'm not, looking for anything serious. I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but blah, blah, blah. Just set the expectation early. And that was fine. So we go on a couple of dates and it's nice. And so we end up going back to his place. Mm-hmm. And I realize he was a little more cub sized. And there's this phenomenon that you identified for me, which is that if you're standing in a room of thin, attractive West Hollywood gay guys, and there's one person who's just not that, who's like a little bit fatter than that.
Yeah.
He looks much different.
Oh yeah. It's like you found the super chub at 230 pounds.
At 230 pounds. And so like made it back to his place. And eventually I was it was starting to hit me that the two things. And the first one was, oh, he doesn't know that I'm into him because of his size.
Right.
Like,
because you didn't meet him in the context where he would.
Right. And he doesn't necessarily assumes that I'm into him, but maybe it's like, people can be into somebody for a lot of different reasons.
Exactly.
And so I realized, oh, I have to come out before this goes any further.
Well, and I wonder how true that is.
Maybe not. I don't know. In my head, it was like, if I start touching him in certain ways, that I would need to like be able to feel free and like actually go for it. Like, is that going to unnerve him?
But here's the thing. Let's say that he was with just a guy who thought he was attractive, who doesn't identify as a chubby chaser, maybe isn't even a chubby chaser, just, a guy who weighs 230, 250 pounds. That's just not a deal breaker for him.
Sure.
Right. There are all sorts of attractive guys, and this is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And he finds himself with his hands on his body. Well, someone who's 230, 250 pounds, there's a lot of surface area in a particular area of that body. And the hand is going to go there because it's going to go to the surface area.
Yeah.
So what I'm saying is that you can enjoy this man's body without declaring your sexual identity. And it really has a lot more to do, not with your sexual identity. It really has so much more to do with how comfortable he is with his body.
Yes, I would agree with that. And I think that was why, in my head, that was why I brought it up in the first place, was like, I don't want to get into a moment of, oh, wait, I have to stop because I have triggered something here. Like if he has some kind of struggle with his weight or whatever, I don't want to do something and have him make an assumption or like have a reaction or whatever, maybe there's no avoiding that. Like, and in this case, that wasn't an issue.
Yeah.
And it was great. The second thing that happened, which happened later in the same night, was I started to understand myself a little better in a different way, which is, you know, I think over the last 10 years, I've had a pretty wide variety of experiences with guys, but most of them have been the other person who was more interested in me than I was in them. For what I couldn't have possibly identified until somewhat recently. But the simplest way to put it is like, I didn't have a clear understanding of I can be attracted to a wide range of weights, let's say, like a couple 100 pounds. I can be attracted, but there's the top end of that range is like, that's a whole other ballpark. That's like, okay, now we have like, you know, the rocket ship is on the launch pad for any of these guys, but this other rocket ship is already to fucking Venus on the one end of the spectrum. Like,
yeah, we need to talk about that.
Yes, we should talk about that. Because I realized that in the moment and eventually did communicate, not that specific idea, but just like, hey, like, you know, I'm probably not going to get off, basically.
Now you're talking about, are we back in that date?
One particular moment with that one particular guy. And it was still, I thought, still lovely. And we had several dates after that and we had a lot of good times. But I was never so excited that I was going to, you know, that just wasn't going to happen for me.
Right. And I think there's so many things to say about that. One, that's fine. Because as long as you're okay with what's not happening and okay with what is happening, that's a fine place to be.
Yeah.
And assuming he is too.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've definitely had that with guys where like you are really, I had this guy with, he was just downright athletic and thin, but he was so friggin' sexy. And I can't remember if I've told this story on the podcast, but I've told it elsewhere in like seminars and stuff. You know, I knew this wasn't going to go anywhere sexually, but he's related to me sexually. What am I supposed to do about that? And I just copped to it. I said, like, I just told him that. Like, this is what I'm into. This is probably, blah, 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 blah. And we had a really great time. I didn't come, and that was fine. And he was fine with that. He came gallons. But that was okay because we just made it okay. We included that. Like,
sure.
That we didn't make it wrong. And I think if more people would just say that, and, you know, I mean, it's also possible that someone's out there is going to surprise themselves.
True. And I think I wanted to be open to that experience. Like I think that particular time in my life was very much about, I want to broaden my horizons in all directions. I want to just, in wanting to learn more about myself, I wanted to push outside some of the, I guess, comfort zones that I had settled in. And so, yes, I will go on a date with this guy that I might not normally have thought that I would date, but he's like really attractive and really smart and funny and all of these good things. And okay, so we identified basically, like you just said, like, okay, this isn't going to happen for me, but I'm really enjoying everything else. Yeah. And I like hanging out with you. And I think we're having a good time together. So like, let's just do that.
Well, and so many men are trained that the point of sex is to ejaculate, and maybe even to ejaculate in a particular way, in a particular orifice. And that's not sex. That's a sexual act. There's a whole lot more to sex.
And I think that's also specifically like I feel like that's a case where you haven't been able to actually satisfy that need yet in some way. And so that's all you want. It's like all you can really go for because you never really truly exercise the fantasy. And if you get to the point where you can have that, suddenly I feel like you can then broaden your horizons and enjoy many different experiences. But until you've been able to satisfy maybe the thing that feels the most important to you or the most instinctual, like you're just constantly going to be craving that one thing that you're never really getting enough of. That's been my experience. And then
it's interesting what you're describing. I find this interesting. I made this analogy, but what you're describing is sort of like binge eating. Yeah. Where, you know, one of the causes of binge eating is depriving yourself. Like, I'm not going to have it. I'm not going to have it. I'm not going to have it. And so when you do have it,
it's like all you want and you just have way too much of it.
And how I compare this with chasers is so many chasers, they don't have a lot of fat guys that they're having relations with in real life, even just friendships. You know, all their friends are thin and just, you know, regular. And they have this, it may be a secret, it may be not so much a secret, but they don't have because we don't have a lot of, you know, 300-pound guys at bars, they can't walk into a bar and pick up like some of their regular friends.
Mm-hmm.
So I think they may feel like there's this scarce. Like it's funny because chubs usually are the ones who are concerned about scarcity. There's not enough chasers, and it's funny how chasers have exactly the same sort of like, no, there's and then they get super picky. Like, no, I didn't like that one exactly. No, he seemed a little too effeminate. I didn't like the way his nose was on his face.
I think it's like
stop it.
I think it's as long as you're chasing some fantasy.
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't actually appreciate the other experiences around you until you've satisfied that fantasy in some way.
Well, and if you think that the goal of sex is to come, I got news for you. You don't need the other person for that.
You can just do that on
You
your
can
own.
do that yourself far more efficiently and really almost anytime you want. So why would you involve another person if the only function is to get off? There must be something beyond getting off that you are in search of.
Oh, Dan, give the chasers some credit. They can do that anytime they want.
Well, I'm thinking like they're in a meeting.
Yeah. No. If you're determined.
You're determined. If you just have the right cloth.
No, but I think that's interesting because for me, the flip side of that came, I don't know, months and months later. I had the opposite experience with a guy where it was like the eye-opening moment of, this is it. Like, this is the thing that I didn't know that I was missing that I'm now understanding. And I don't want to put it all around size, but
Size
we've talked
matters.
about, like, so this is the point that we were trying to like come up on is like, yeah, I think it does. I think it does. It makes a difference.
And you were saying that, I was thinking of that moment in Fellowship of the Rings where Merry or Pippin says, he comes in pints.
Yes. It's that same kind of delight and surprise. Like, oh my God.
All right, so let's talk about why. Because, because there's a lot of ways people could be listening to this, which is, they're a thin civilian and they're like, size, really? And then there's the guy who feels like he's betwixt and between.
Right, and that I'm worried about that.
There is that chub who is in the 200 to, let's say, 250 range, who feels like he's too fat for the bars and too thin for the chub events.
The chasers, sure.
And so he's like, where am I supposed to go? And my message there is, well, actually, you just you get both. Mm. And yeah, there's going to be people in both crowds that, you're going to be the wrong size for, but you've also got twice the population to look in.
Right.
It's
a wider net.
It's a wider net. And then there's like the chubs, the super chubs, the mega chubs, and all that. So why does size matter? So it's not just because a lot of times chasers are perceived as like hunting the white rhino.
Right.
Like we want the biggest game we can find.
It's not, yeah.
It isn't for some, I will admit, for some chasers, it is that. And that's easy. Stay away from those guys. You can smell it. Because it's all about how much do you weigh? How much do you weigh now? Okay. And then can you do, and you can smell it.
Just carve a scarlet letter on their forehead and
you can smell
you'll
it.
be able to avoid it forever.
On the other hand, there is something, as a fat person, that life at 500 pounds is not the same as life at 300 pounds. Mm. And therefore, that sex at 500 pounds is not the same as sex at 300 pounds. Well, guess what? Chasers know that too.
Or if they don't know it, they'll figure it out.
Yeah. And, like one of the things that I think I do particularly well in bed with a guy is about the sensuality and the intimacy. Mm. Well, that involves a lot of physical contact and a lot of eye contact and a lot of stuff like that. Mm. And a body that is 500 pounds simply is equipped differently than one that is 300 pounds or 250 pounds. And it's not just more that I can do. I don't mean to, because that makes it sound like a to-do list I'm trying to get down. It's really more that my talents are geared to the pleasuring of larger men. Mm. I understand that anatomy in a way that I'm not equipped to pleasure someone who is straight-sized or someone who is maybe even 230. Mm-hmm. Like my talents aren't not going to apply to that body.
Well, and it's funny because what you're describing for me because I've been with a handful of guys my size or maybe a little bit larger. And every time I've had this weird imposter syndrome of like, wait, is this what thin sex is like? Is this what we're supposed to be doing? Because I'm not doing things that I want to be doing. And it's this weird, like, I feel like I'm acting out a scene, like a scene in a movie for somebody else's benefit, where all of the stuff that either, not just that I want to do, but that I know that I can do well, like the things that I have confidence about, I can't do. And so I'm in this weird position of like, what tools are in my arsenal? This feels so limiting. Like there's so little stuff that I can do. Like it feels, I mean, I hate to put it this way, but it kind of feels like the difference between very simplified vanilla sexual experiences with somebody when you know that you have a whole host of other experiences that you could be having with somebody else. Like it's like, okay, we can shut the door here, but I know there's a party going on the other side of that door. And like, we can have a good time here. That's not the, like, but there's a whole party. Like we could go have snacks and drinks.
Well, that was the end of part 1, but don't worry, there's a lot more Chaser Chat coming up in part 2.
And we'll see you then.